Order, order. Kirsty Blackman to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Sir Desmond. I beg to move that this House has considered transitional support for North Sea oil and gas workers. Sir Desmond, I appreciate the chance to get to bring this debate because it is an incredibly important time for the oil and gas industry. It is an incredibly important time for those who are employed in and around oil and gas. What I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out the context of where we are right now and then talk about some key asks that I have for the government given the current situation and the worries that people have about the direction of travel. I'd like to start with a quote from the 7th Carbon Budget. It says, as of 2021, direct employment in oil and gas in Aberdeen has declined by nearly 1/3 since 2015. Household disposable income has fallen and poverty has increased. Some estimates indicate that around 14,000 people in the region will need to have moved to other roles or other sectors between 2022 and 2030. I think that is such a stark comment from a very well-respected organisation producing an incredibly useful and informative report. The fact that they say that household disposable income has fallen and poverty has increased, and that is not just in the same way as in the national average it has, it's not in the same way that everybody is feeling the pinch of the cost of living. It is directly as a result of the changes to the energy industry and the lack of pickup that there has been in the renewable sector to compensate for that. We have, as a result of political uncertainty, as a result of the current situation, as a result of the current direction of travel, we've got a real lack of confidence within the industry. Now, that's the energy industry more widely. It is the case that we are expecting oil and gas companies, we're expecting those companies who have previously majored in oil and gas to be funding a significant part of this renewables revolution. We're expecting them to be funding the offshore wind power that we will need. We're expecting them to be putting their money in. We're expecting them to be using their skilled workers or their skilled workers to be transferring into these industries. Now, we're at the point right now where we're at risk of losing that significant edge that we have. That significant edge that we have in terms of the skills, in terms of the manufacturing capabilities, in terms of the people that we have. We're at risk of losing that if the government doesn't take more action now in order to ensure that this transition is just, in order to ensure that this transition is, more importantly, I think, actually, for this debate, managed properly. As a result of the lack of confidence that we have, final investment decision choices that are being taken by either oil and gas companies or by those companies who are working specifically in renewables and not so much in oil and gas, those final investment decisions are being pushed back, whether that's to do with the lack of ability to get grid connections right now, whether that's to do with the government's changes around EPL and the extension of the windfall tax, which, by the way, has been stopped in every other country that has had a windfall tax. Whether it's any of those things, companies are feeling that the government is not going the right way. If we look at the energy transition survey that's done by the Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce, you can see that political uncertainty and worry about the political direction of travel has increased from the 7th top worry to the top worry in just a 2-year period. And I think that's incredibly important to note, that whatever the government thinks it might be doing, whatever rhetoric it is using around this, the industry doesn't believe that it's quite got it right and it needs to change where it's going.
She spoke about the way in which other countries have ended their windfall tax, but does she accept that the basic rate of tax that was being applied by the previous government to the oil and gas industry in the North Sea was actually the lowest in the world, and it's only with the windfall tax that it comes up to the global average?
I think in terms of the windfall tax, I had concerns about the windfall tax in the first place. I thought that there should be a windfall tax applied, but I thought that it should be applied across the board to all of those companies that made significant profits during COVID. So whether that was supermarkets or Amazon or oil and gas companies, I thought that singling out the oil and gas industry was the wrong thing to do at the time. In terms of the actual level and comparisons of the level, I don't know the answer. I don't want to say something that's not right. I don't know the answer on that, but I did feel that it was wrongly applied because there was significant numbers of other companies, and the oil and gas industry therefore felt singled out and felt like actually they were being told that they were somehow different to other industries, and I absolutely accept that in a significant number of ways they are different to other industries, but given the fact that they weren't at the levels of high that they maybe were in 2014, for example, singling them out when supermarkets were making a much higher percentage profit than they had been in previous years didn't seem like the right thing to do. In terms of the actual individuals that we have within the industry and the skills that we have, I appreciate the government's work on a skills passport. I do think that that is important. But whatever you have in place around a skills passport, there's no point in having it if the jobs are not there. And we have not seen the offshore wind industry increase at the pace that we would have liked to see it. We can't therefore do all the work that we would like to do or that is needed to do around the reduction in the amount of oil and gas without those jobs for people to move to. One of the companies in that ET40 report that I mentioned said, forcing the end of oil and gas for our company before offshore wind is ready to replace the lost revenues is one of their biggest concerns. And I think that that's exactly where a significant number of people are right now. We do have companies struggling to find people with the skills that they need, whether that is in oil and gas or whether that is in offshore renewables, for example. If you look specifically at offshore renewables and you look specifically at the building of those offshore renewables, the people that are going to be doing that are going to be working 3-on, 3-off shifts in the same way that oil and gas workers do. It's actually really difficult to adjust to life on 3-on, 3-off shifts, right? It is not easy to change your life and ensure that you've got somebody at home looking after the kids if you've got a family. It's not easy to do that. Whereas oil and gas workers have got that transferability because their lifestyle is already set up to do that. Now, we're at a significant tipping point just now. We risk those highly mobile, highly paid oil and gas workers going abroad. If you again look at that ET40 report, you can see a significant percentage of those people are moving within company to postings abroad, or they're moving within other companies to postings abroad. If you ask my constituents, you know, an unbelievable number of people who live in Aberdeen North, despite the massive disparities that we have in some of the disposable income, have been to Dubai. You know, they've been on holiday to Dubai. The majority of people who represent constituencies in this room will not have many constituents who've spent holidays in Dubai, whereas I've got heaps. Because they've got that level of transferability, they've got that level of portability, they can up sticks and move to another country because drilling is the same in another country. Maybe you're doing it at a higher carbon cost and you're doing it at, with fewer terms and conditions, but you are still getting a job that is highly paid. You can uproot and go and do that because you're used to moving around the world. If we don't take control of this situation now, we will lose those skills that we need to power that renewable future. And I think that's an incredible amount of concern. The UK government's founding mission, one of them is about growing the economy. We're not going to be able to grow the economy if we do not take advantage of this situation, and the time is now for it.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. The member's making a very, very good speech indeed. I congratulate her on it. She talks about skills. If I could just go back to the point she made about fabrication skills, the point is, in my constituency, we have those skills, but they're ageing skills. And there will come a time when these people retire, and then they could be lost.
I think we've got a huge amount of work to do, particularly with young people. And actually, I was heartened to hear, talking to Developing the Young Workforce North East relatively recently, that a significant number of young people in the North East do still want to go into engineering. I think that's incredibly important, whether that's engineering, whether that's more on the fabricating side of things. Engineering's involved in all of it. But I am worried that we will lose that. I'm worried that the industry is ageing out. The same thing is happening in offshore oil and gas, because people are looking at the fact fact that their uncle, their cousin, their granddad was made redundant in oil and gas, and therefore they're worried about the idea of going into engineering. And if we don't have these young people who are excited and passionate about the future of renewables, then we're not going to be able to build that amazing tech that we need in order to ensure that those renewables are delivering a profit, are working on a commercial basis. So I do have concerns, particularly around the skills thing. One of the key things that the government could do is take more action to ensure more UK content and particularly UK fabrication in some of it, because we've got amazing fabrication works. You know, not so much in Aberdeen, but around the rest of the North East, around the rest of Scotland, around the rest of the UK. And that was one of the points I wanted to make. For all that this is a significant problem for Aberdeen, it is a significant problem for the rest of the UK. Only 25% of the jobs in offshore oil and gas are actually in the North East of Scotland.
Members making an excellent speech. Thank you, Mr. Chair, as always. On the point of fabrication, does she see the connectivity between the universities and colleges sector and the education sector and the transition? And I make particular reference to my own constituency and in Arbroath and Broadferry and in Dundee, where we're seeing some excellent work on fabrication, but of course more can always be done.
I absolutely agree, and you know, the honourable member would expect me to talk about Aberdeen University, which is in my constituency, and Robert Gordon University, which is also in the city. The work that they've been doing as part of the Aberdeen City Deal, as part of the Energy Transition Zone, with NESCOL as well, has been really important in ensuring that we have got those skills for the future. There's a significant number of jobs being put in place, and a significant number of things like foundation apprenticeships being put in place by Aberdeenshire Council, for example, in order to ensure that young people are encouraged into that. But we need the tech, we need those people thinking about those ideas, as well as the people to make it. But we've got all of the right ingredients. They are all there. We just need to ensure that everybody has got confidence in the commitments that are being made. And I think that's where the gap is. I have no doubt, and I've spoken to the Minister about this, that he is strongly committed. My concern is that the industry doesn't believe that the government is strongly committed to this. The industry does not believe that the government is strongly enough committed to a just and managed transition. In terms of just one more thing on jobs around that, in Aberdeen and in the North East of Scotland, particularly in the city, there's around 12 to 17% of people in Aberdeen City are directly employed in oil and gas. A significant number are indirectly employed in oil and gas, and we've seen already a massive reduction in the jobs. So since 2014, the jobs in the offshore industries, in oil and gas, have reduced significantly. We've also seen in recent times an increase in the spending, an increase in the revenues in relation to wind, offshore wind, for example, but a reduction of 4,000 in the number of jobs that are there. So something is not going right. And my concern is that, and the key ask that I'm away to make is about the listening to people and about having a plan. Just one more thing on context. We are in a situation that is very different from how the world looked in July last year. In July last year, when the government was elected, we did not have Donald Trump in the White House. We did not have the levels of global uncertainty that are being caused by that. You know, we're importing something like 20% of our LNG that we import comes from the US. We're involved in global trading markets for oil, for gas. An increase in that global volatility means that we need to think more seriously about energy security in a way that we have had to do since Russia invaded Ukraine, in a way that we have had to do since things that happened around COVID. But it is even more desperate now that we take control of everything that we can take control of in terms of energy security, and do not rely as significantly on those imports as the government's current direction of travel, particularly when we don't have the gas storage, for example, and we're basically using LNG ships as offshore floating storage. The key asks that I have are about listening to people. The Minister does go out and does listen to people, but what they are saying is that the government is not getting it right. They're saying that they're perfectly happy with some of the rhetoric, but they're concerned about the action behind that rhetoric not following through. They don't trust yet that the government are actually committed to a just and managed transition. And whatever the government's views are on that, whether the government is or isn't committed to a just and managed transition, they need to ensure that people believe that they are. And that is the gap. That is what they need to solve. And in order to solve that, what I would suggest is, in line with the North Sea Transition Task Force, securing the future of energy transition, and also in line with the Offshore Energies UK most recent report, around ensuring that there is a kind of mission control. There is somebody in charge of this. I appreciate the Minister, I appreciate the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Deputy Secretary of State for Scotland talking about this, being willing to answer my questions on this. But nobody seems to be in control of it. There is no oversight from a governmental level. There is no one person in government that everybody can say that person is in charge of the just and managed transition. There's no group that's been set out. You know, we've all seen just transition plans, right, by many organisations, by the government. But nobody seems to be saying this is the just transition plan, this is what we are following, this is where we want to go. And I think that commitment from government, if it was willing to look at those key asks from OEUK, if it was willing to look at those key asks from the North Sea Transition Plan, that would make a big difference, saying this person is designated as our just transition Mandarin, however you want to style them, the person that is in charge of that, that is who we go to if we have a concern. That is the person that will ensure that across government, these decisions are being taken in order to protect those jobs. There are other things that the government could do in terms of the £28 billion commitment, in terms of the spending review. There will be uproar if that £28 billion is cut during the spending review. I would beg the government not to cut that money. In terms of the consultation that's been undertaken on, there's a DESNES consultation that is closed. There's also a consultation on the tax regime, the fiscal regime. My slight concern about all of those is the timing. So oil and gas companies particularly will be making final investment decisions. They'll be making plans for next year, maybe in August, September this year. If we don't have an outcome, particularly on the fiscal regime stuff, by that point, then companies will say it's too uncertain, we're not going to invest next year. And again, we will look at the loss of jobs as a result. The timing is key on this. Even if the government cannot announce its final decisions around the fiscal regime, for example, if it can give a direction of travel to industry in advance of those investment decisions being made, in advance of their financial plans being laid down, then we will not lose next year. And I'm really worried that we're at the point that we will lose next year and lose all of the associated jobs as a result. I do believe, Sir Desmond, that the government is not yet getting this right, that they need to do more listening, that they need to ensure that they are taking control of this. And I would say that the facts have changed, the context has changed in the past year because of those global changes, because of the job losses that we are continuing to see. I'm not asking the government to roll back on what they planned before. I'm asking the government to look at the fact that the context and the facts have changed, and therefore the plan needs to change to recognise that changed context. This is not about having to walk back where you are, where you believe you should be. This is about ensuring a secure future. This is about ensuring that the people in my constituency who are employed in oil and gas, that the people across the UK, 75% of those workers are employed in the rest of the UK, that all of those have got a secure future. We cannot see that gap. If there's a gap between where the oil and gas jobs go down and the renewable jobs go up, we will lose all of that talent. We will lose this incredible bonanza that we are at the best possible point to take advantage of. And we might lose it just because people don't believe that the government is committed enough to this. Now is the time to take these decisions, Minister. Now is the time to ensure that people believe that the government is committed to a just and to a managed transition.
The question is that this House has considered transitional support for North Sea oil and gas workers. Let's go for 6 minutes each. Brian Leishman.
Good morning, Sir Desmond. It is an honour to serve under your chairship today, and my thanks go to the honourable member for Aberdeen North for securing this important, vital debate. The fate of the skilled workers of the oil and gas sector hangs very much in the balance. Currently, nowhere more so than in my constituency in Grangemouth. Once known as Scotland's boomtown, Grangemouth has refined oil for over a century. The refinery has been a generational employer for local families, a destination that has provided transformational opportunity for those local people. It's provided world-class training, good pay, leading to improving living standards and community prosperity. However, the owners, INEOS and PetroChina, the petrochemical wing of the Chinese state, have decided to call time on Grangemouth and Scotland's refining capability. The first set of redundancies start in just a week's time, and the thousands of job losses that will happen shows the precarious position workers are in when private capital and a foreign government own such a vital piece of infrastructure. Sir Desmond, regarding the refinery, I don't want to hear anyone insult the intelligence of the Grangemouth workers and utter the phrase just transition. Jobs are going to be lost and the new energy industries are just not ready. That's the very definition of an unjust transition. I also don't want the government to say that the £100 million growth deal for Falkirk and Grangemouth is the solution, not when the refinery is worth over £400 million a year to the Scottish economy. And the £200 million from the National Wealth Fund that the Prime Minister announced at Scottish Labour Conference to entice new industries is welcome. But that money is conditional on private capital investment coming in with no planned government ownership, meaning workers, communities and Scotland will be at the mercy of private capital and foreign ownership again. I will ask the Minister why the government are not learning any lessons. Sir Desmond, the refinery's influence goes beyond the town because Grangemouth oil keeps Scotland's 5.5 million people moving. And I don't need to ask the Minister if the refinery closing will compromise Scotland's fuel security, because it obviously will. Because Scotland will now order oil in from mainland Europe. It'll arrive, go through a vastly reduced quality control process and then be distributed from the new import terminal at Grangemouth. Scotland will be dependent on European transportation logistics, an energy-rich nation losing self-reliance, a farcical and dangerous set of circumstances. Grangemouth only wants consistency, and that means the government treating Scotland's only oil refinery in the same manner that Scunthorpe Steel was. So I put it to the Minister that the recall of Parliament showed that when there is a political will, then things can get done. A government can intervene and save jobs, a community and an industry. The argument that Grangemouth should be treated differently to Scunthorpe is a total nonsense. The similarities are strikingly clear. The government could and should do the same for Grangemouth. It's the right thing to do for workers, communities and a nation's security. That should be enough reason to intervene. But if it isn't, then I suggest the government have a look at the political implications. Because Scotland is watching, and our party will get a rude awakening at the ballot box in May 2026 over this issue. Step in, save the jobs, and extend the life of the Grangemouth refinery until the new energy industries are ready.
Thank you, Sir Desmond, and thank you to the Honourable for Admiral for bringing this debate. To say that it's a really important debate doesn't really feel like it's doing it justice. What we're seeing in the North Sea in terms of job losses, investment drying up and companies either folding or choosing to end their UK operations is not us being alarmist or pessimistic or over-exaggerating, as most of us in this room understand that, but sadly it's not the case across the House. These are the cold, hard facts. Across the UK, approximately 120,000 people are employed in the oil and gas sector, of which approximately half are in Scotland. And the average age of an oil and gas worker is in their mid-40s. This is their transition, not a future transition. It matters now. In the UK, 1 in every 200 people are employed either directly or indirectly in the offshore energy sector, and that is significantly weighted towards oil and gas work, both offshore on rigs and FPSOs or onshore as geologists, geophysicists, petrophysicists or in our crucial supply chains. This increases to 1 in 25 across Scotland and to about 1 in 5 in North East Scotland, and that again increases to 1 in 3 if you're including induced jobs. And the impacts of a poorly managed transition will not just be felt in Aberdeen or Aberdeenshire or North East Scotland, but the entirety of the UK will suffer. No other UK cluster has the energy capability of North East Scotland, the skills, supply chains, university specialisms or experiences. If we in North East Scotland lose our brightest, best, most innovative and experienced energy workers in the transition from oil and gas to renewable energies, we will lose them to the whole of the UK. But in all of this, we cannot forget, pretend or mislead ourselves and others that transferring to renewable energies is in any way incompatible with continuing to produce oil and gas from the North Sea, because it isn't. But more than that, continuing supporting our domestic oil and gas sector will only help any transition to renewables to succeed. Will we still need oil and gas for years to come? Yes. That point is, it seems, largely uncontested, and certainly the government have confirmed that. So why, and I still haven't heard a coherent answer to this, why is the government effectively ensuring we don't have a viable oil and gas sector? Removing the investment allowances, increasing and extending EPL levels to higher than any other mature basin, and banning new licences. None of these support the sector, help domestic supplies or protect current jobs. The OE UK suggests that 50% of domestic oil and gas needs could be supplied from the North Sea until 2050, but only if policies to allow it to be extracted are provided. Brent oil is today at $68 a barrel, almost half the $123 a barrel it peaked at in 2022, and currently below the EPL price floor of $71 a barrel. How and why does the Minister expect North Sea businesses to continue in the UK when they're being penalised for the product, despite the government saying that we need their product? And for multinational companies, as we've heard, how can their UK arm compete with funding and investment with energy sectors in other countries when they are so much more supported, encouraged and offer far greater returns? When investment goes abroad, jobs follow or jobs are lost. It's that simple. And I say again, our oil and gas sector is vital to UK's energy transition. I want to focus on what the vast majority of people I've spoken to who are involved in or with the sector talk to me about, and that is timing. Timing is the most crucial thing in supporting the energy transition, and I'd like the Minister to reflect on that in his closing remarks. If we take offshore wind, the RGU Energy Transition Institute estimates an increase from approximately 11,000 jobs in 2024 to 46,000 in 2025, which on the face of it looks great, 35,000 new jobs. But more or less all of these jobs will come on stream post-2030, by which time, at the current trajectory of job and investment losses, we are expected to lose 60,000 oil and gas jobs, 50% of which will be in Scotland. No skills passport will bring those jobs back. That isn't a fair or just transition. It's a disaster waiting to happen for North East Scotland. And the issue isn't just the time for which these jobs need to come on stream, it's the types of jobs and whether the companies will have remained afloat in the North East in the interim. Looking at the two main categories of jobs at the moment, the vast majority of our energy work is in operational activities, such as the day-to-day operations of the industry, while the remaining about third work in the capital expenditure, such as building and manufacturing of kit. But the manpower to run and operate a rig day-to-day far exceeds the needs of daily working requirements of, for example, a wind farm. So if and until the UK can increase its manufacturing base of wind infrastructure, allowing jobs to be created in capital work rather than just operational work, there is no prospect for transferring the tens of thousands of workers from oil and gas to wind or other renewable energy sectors. Similarly, timing is vital for companies to keep their order books, if not full, but at least ticking over with traditional energy oil and gas contracts, again assuming that the government's policies are changed to support the sector, before offshore wind contracts truly pick up. Speaking to the CEO of a supply chain company recently, she had very real concerns of a void in contracts in the next 2 to 5 years, which they would not be able to get across. Indeed, what company can retain a workforce if they have no work? Companies like these are vital to the transition. We cannot afford to lose them due to an expedited, unmanaged decline of oil and gas. RGU estimates that 80% of the oil and gas supply chain is transferable to adjacent sectors. but the reality is that the supply chain will only survive if the transition is managed. If we run down production too quickly before wind is effectively scaled, the capabilities and expertise will be lost. And Sir Desmond, I'll end on a quick quote from the North Sea Transition Task Force. They warned that, unless governments act swiftly, there will be no transition. The old North Sea will fade away, along with the skills of individuals and the entrepreneurial skills of businesses in the North Sea supply chain. Thank you.
Barry Gardner.
So Desmond, I think this is the first time I've had the pleasure of speaking under your chairmanship, so I'm very pleased to have you in the chair, and I want to congratulate the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North for securing this really important debate. So Desmond, it said that if you remember the 60s, then you weren't really there. But if you were there in the 80s and the closure of the pits, you will never forget. You'll never forget the violence. You'll never forget the politicisation of the police. You'll never forget the devastation of communities. That was a transition, an energy transition. It wasn't just, to pick up the lady's remarks. This debate takes place at a key point in that transition away from oil and gas production in the North Sea. With the government's consultation on building the North Sea's energy future underway and the clean energy mission driving forwards at some pace, securing clean energy generation, securing the wealth creation that will go with it and the jobs is non-negotiable if we're not to repeat the same unjust transition of before. It's a simple truth. The North Sea basin is in terminal decline. That's not a political choice. It's a geological reality. For too long, the previous government buried its head in the sand and watched as jobs supported by the UK's oil and gas industry more than halved over the past decade. That's why this government is right to finally draw a line under new licensing and the illusion of endless new oil and gas. The Stone Age didn't come to an end because of the lack of stone, and the oil age will not come to an end because of a lack of oil, but because energy can be produced more cleanly and more cheaply by renewable technologies. The demand for hydrocarbons is expected to peak globally in the next 5 years, but energy companies are still adopting business models focused on growing output volume rather than on maximizing shareholder value. Creating the stranded assets of the future is bad management, and failing to build the skills base for tomorrow's future is bad business planning. The myth that North Sea licenses are the answer to our energy security is a dangerous one. Hundreds of licenses have been issued over the past decades, and there have been just 16 days' worth of gas to show for it. We're lucky to have an abundance of renewable resources in the UK, and this is the only route forward to deliver for the workers and for the communities who are tied to a declining oil and gas industry. So the current North Sea transition deal, it's not fit for purpose. It places far too much responsibility on the companies themselves. Those companies are not delivering what is needed. A mere 7 out of the 87 North Sea oil and gas operators are even considering investment in renewable energy by 2030. We can't outsource the future of our workers and our energy security to the very companies whose current business model is failing. We need a radical shift. The time for a coherent deal for the North Sea is now. It's vital that the government commits to bringing forward a bold and ambitious plan with the urgency that this time demands. Beyond extraction lies an immense opportunity, building a world-leading offshore wind manufacturing sector here in the UK. Our existing wind farms, many of which are in Scotland, provide a fifth of global capacity, and they prove what's possible. But it's a scandal that the previous government allowed, that the average North Sea turbine is overwhelmingly built with material from abroad. We are exporting jobs and prosperity. GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund must be laser-focused on building up a thriving manufacturing sector. A properly resourced clean industry bonus is not just good policy, it's got the potential to create 10,000 permanent direct jobs and 13,000 indirect ones in areas that need it, like the Honourable Lady's constituency. So can the Minister confirm what conversations he's had with Cabinet colleagues relating to the clean industry bonus, and whether there is any scope to boost the funds behind the bonus to truly seize this moment? Our renewable ambition is crippled by outdated ports and dockside facilities. The 1.8 billion in the National Wealth Fund is a good start, but if we're to truly lead in homegrown energy, it's crucial that that is expanded. The funding must be safeguarded, it must be expanded, and the government should be taking equity stakes in ports as critical national infrastructure. The unjust transition referred to by my honourable friend for Alloa and Grangemouth at the refinery in his constituency, and the situation in Port Talbot are warning signs that early government intervention and investment is paramount to secure the future of our workers. They deserve to experience a smooth transition. For the UK's oil and gas workforce specifically, over 90% have transferable skills, but they report facing a lack of support for transitioning into other industries. The Energy Skills Passport is a start, but workers are footing the bill for their own retraining, which often duplicates their existing qualifications. Government needs to commit to streamlining that process, and crucially, the Minister should meet with the Treasury to deliver the £335 million a year training fund that unions and climate groups are rightly calling for, a fund that provides paid time off to retrain for those workers. Look, we live in a volatile world. The era of relying on global fossil fuel markets is over. True energy and worker security lies in our own abundant renewable resources. But the opportunity to create the thousands of high-quality jobs in a new green economy is here. It's within our grasp. I urge the Minister to seize it.
5-minute limit. Jamie Stone.
Thank you very much, Sir Desmond. What a pleasure to see a fellow St Andrew in your august position. And I'm sure the Honourable Member for Brent North West would agree with me on that point. Can I also congratulate the Member for Aberdeen North for making a very, very comprehensive speech. And it is greatly encouraging to see that one of my colleagues, our colleagues here, understands the situation as thoroughly as she clearly does. And well done for that speech. Now, Sir Desmond, I want to take a look at the historical perspective on this. I am of such a great age that I can remember before North Sea Oil. And my class at Tain Academy, far too many of them, when they left school, went south. They disappeared. They were part of the Highland clearances, if you like, in latter years. My own father said to me, you know, when you leave school, you'll find your best employment chances are down south, not up here in the Highlands. And then North Sea came. And then everything changed. Everything changed massively. Our fabrication yard was constructed at Nig, near my hometown of Tain, one at Kishorn and Wester Ross, Ardesea near Inverness, and many other sites in Scotland and England too. And this meant that local people could find high-quality employment, that they didn't have this opportunity before then. Highly paid jobs, skilled jobs. They learnt skills, rigging, welding, all that's been referred to by the member for Aberdeen North. And just to go back to the yard where I worked, at Nig, at the height of it all, 5,000 people, no less, worked in that yard, constructing the mighty Conoco Hutton production platform. Those were the great old days. Now, since then, as others have alluded to, the situation has changed. Today, like the member for Aberdeen North, I have many, many constituents who work offshore. But the same opportunity, or perhaps not a necessity, of them considering moving to abroad is there. It's the same story. And very often when they move, they'll maybe move south because it's easier to get to where they want to work, in Kuwait or wherever. And that means that we're faced with that old dread demon of Highland depopulation, people leaving again. And we can see that now when we have an ageing population and we don't have as many younger carers as we'd like. Very often these families are beginning to go. And that is part of the tragedy of it all. And the reason I came down when Parliament was recalled that Saturday was because British steel means everything in terms of constructing oil platforms, or possibly, and I'll touch on in a second, floating offshore wind structures. So safeguarding that industry seemed hugely important to me, and that is why I made the journey there and back on that Saturday, to be here to give my vote to support that. But, as the Honourable Member for Brent West has pointed out, far too much of the wind turbines are made of steel that is not made in this country. Far too many parts of those turbines are not made in this country either. And we have the great hope, the shining hope, that one day we will be using the skills, ageing skills that I've referred to, but training up young people to start building the turbines, the nacelles, the blades here in the UK. We're not doing nearly enough of it as we should. And yet, today, at Nig, we have one of the finest graving docks in Europe. It's perfect at the site. Kishon is being revived, and yet, we're still not making the bits and pieces that we should. Yes, we're putting them together. Yes, we're putting them in the North Sea. I give the Beatricefield of my constituency as an example, but there's a lot more to be done. And Sir Desmond, in the minute and a half that I have left, yes, it's been alluded to by the Honourable Member for Abbey North. The world has changed since Putin and Trump. Oil is a strategic asset. It's something we're lucky enough to have, and we shouldn't be talking it down all the time. We have the new discoveries, and we should look upon them as, if you like, cash in the bank for the future. And oil is not just about burning hydrocarbons, it's about pharmaceuticals, it's about many, many other uses. And we should always remember that we're fortunate that the good Lord gave us this strategic asset. And I conclude simply where I began. So many of my class went away. In more recent decades, it's been different. People stayed. And every single job in oil and gas is absolutely crucial to remote Highland communities. These people coming back on 3 on, 3 off, or whatever, keeps the lights on in the straths and the glens of some of the remotest parts of the Highlands. So, Desmond, thank you very much.
Seamus Logan.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under you. And I want to thank my colleague, the member for Aberdeen North, for bringing this important debate and for her thoughtful and passionate speech introducing the debate. So, many colleagues have already made excellent speeches. I'm not going to repeat many of their points, but the just transition must be both just and fair, so that those sectors and communities are not left on an industrial scrap heap, as they were during the Thatcher years. If just transition means anything, it's got to mean something for the northeast of Scotland. It cannot be left to the market alone to sort these things out. I'll just give you one small example. I've been lobbied recently by the plumbing industry. There is a crisis coming in a few years' time because the training and education sector cannot possibly meet the demands that they're facing because of the financial problems that the training and education sector face. So one of the things that the Minister could do is to nudge the private sector to invest in apprenticeships in those kind of areas so that we prepare alternatives for young people as the North Sea Basin declines. The Scottish Government set up its Just Transition Commission in 2018 to provide scrutiny and advice on its delivery. Northern Ireland is currently consulting on setting up its own commission. Wales established theirs in 2013. But where is the UK-wide Just Transition Commission? The UK Government launched their North Sea consultation in March as a dialogue with North Sea communities to develop a plan on making the best of this transition. I trust that the Minister, in his closing remarks, will tell us how that is going. Now, the chairman of GB Energy Headquarters, perhaps the flagship project of the government, based in Aberdeen, described their work as a very long-term project, with the much-promised 1,000 new jobs taking perhaps 20 years to realise. Even then, it will be a mere drop in the North Sea in terms of replacing the jobs that will be lost in the years ahead. In fact, Unite Scottish Secretary Derek Thompson was recently quoted as saying, "If you look at how many jobs are going to go in the North East, if GB Energy does not pick up the pace and start to move workers in there and start to create proper green jobs, then I'm afraid we could be looking at the desolation of the North East." So speeding ahead is an interesting choice of words for the Secretary of State in this context, given that any decision on funding the Acorn project at St Fergus is now in the June spending review a most uncertain position. Now, I've been asking about this since I was elected, and the UK government were able to find £22 billion for carbon capture schemes in Merseyside and Teesside last autumn, but they couldn't dig deep enough into their pockets for Scotland, which already has much of the infrastructure already there. So I await June's announcement with trepidation, as speed and commitment to North Sea communities in the north east of Scotland has been thin on the ground so far from the UK government. So, Minister, please give us a clue in your closing remarks about where this sits. The Acorn project, the new power station at Peterhead, and investments in key strategic ports at Peterhead and Fraserburgh are key components of this just transition. A Robert Gordon University review on UK offshore energy workforce transferability skills showed that 90% of the oil and gas workforce have transferable skills to work in adjacent energy sectors. So the just transition needs buy-in from the UK government. It can't be left to market forces, which are even more unpredictable in the current political climate, thanks to Trump and the ongoing energy crisis, and Putin as well, of course. Households are facing the third rise in energy costs since Labour came to power. Indeed, the vast majority of UK's offshore wind capacities is owned by companies outside the UK. The typical North Sea turbine contains more than 3 times as much material content from abroad as it does from domestic manufacturers. Yet the wider context here is of an energy market that is paradoxically working against both the interests of the consumer and the companies and investors who want to realise the green energy industrial revolution. If you don't believe me, take a deep dive into zonal pricing. So to conclude, the clean industry bonus, an extra revenue support in CFD rounds, has the potential to bring quality jobs to the UK and in particular Scotland and the north east of Scotland. But there is currently an absence of detail on whether or not specifics such as job quality will be a requirement for investors to receive financial support from the government. So in conclusion, does the Minister acknowledge that private investment does not necessarily guarantee good, secure jobs? And how will he ensure the clean industry bonus delivers good quality jobs in Scotland and supports workers currently reliant on the North Sea oil and gas?
Carla Denyer.
Thank you, Sir Desmond. I welcome the opportunity provided by the member for Aberdeen North to debate transitional support for oil and gas workers who are already bearing the brunt of the North Sea's disorderly decline, as reserves have dwindled without a clear agreed plan. In my first ever job in the renewable energy sector in 2008, 17 years ago now, I co-wrote a report into the huge potential of British North Sea ports to move into the renewable energy industry as locations where offshore wind turbines and associated infrastructure are manufactured and then shipped. Now, whilst some of that has been realised, a lot of opportunities were missed as jobs went overseas. The need for action is now urgent. We already know that new oil and gas projects are incompatible with averting the worst impacts of a climate catastrophe. If the goal is also to provide North Sea workers and communities with the long-term security that they deserve, and it must be, then new oil and gas fields are still not the answer. Because even with hundreds of new licences being issued and new field approvals in the past decade, jobs supported by that UK oil and gas industry have more than halved already, and multiple sources predict a continued decline. We must protect those workers and provide security for that workforce, but in a declining basin, that won't come from desperate attempts to double down on new drilling. Let's take the specific example of the Rosebank oil field. Setting aside the significant climate harm that Rosebank would cause, the claim that this project will create thousands of jobs is inflated. Equinor's own estimate suggests only 255 direct jobs would be created in the UK over its entire lifetime. Equinor has also decided to construct the main offshore vessel for Rosebank in Dubai, and unions are rightly furious that the project has yet to create a single UK design or construction job. Meanwhile, analysis shows that properly investing in British clean energy supply chains could create over 20,000 jobs for workers in key areas like Scotland's oil and gas communities, many of whom, as many members have already pointed out, have a lot of the transferable skills we need. So, rather than bowing to the industry's last-ditch calls for new drilling, will the government do what is needed to protect workers? For too long, oil and gas companies have been in the driving seat of the North Sea's transition, and time again, they choose to prioritise their own short-term interests over the long-term needs of workers and their communities. As the member for Brent West said, alarmingly, just seven out of the 87 North Sea operators plan to invest anything at all in UK renewables between now and 2030. Instead, these companies are on a sunset ride, maximising profits from oil and gas while they still can, regardless of what that means for the rest of us. This lack of investment has clear consequences for workers who are demanding clear pathways out of high-carbon jobs and into renewable energy industries where they know they have a longer-term future. Oil and gas companies like to blame the windfall tax for preventing their ability to invest, but they have been failing to invest long before that levy was ever introduced. We've also seen companies choosing to make workers redundant while simultaneously banking excessive profits and issuing their shareholders huge payouts. More proof that they continue to prioritise their own private interests over the workforce. So, does the Minister agree it's time to stop betting on the private oil and gas industry companies to do the right thing? How does he plan to ensure that workers and communities whose interests are served in the government, ensure that workers and communities' interests are served in the government's plan for the North Sea, rather than just oil and gas bosses? The need for the government to step in and manage the transition in the public interest is now really urgent, and the current approach, which is overwhelmingly focused on de-risking private investment, is wholly insufficient to achieve this aim. It risks recreating the inequalities and failures of our current energy system, where wealth and jobs flow overseas. The unjust closure of the Grangemouth oil refinery without plans to support workers is a damning indictment of that failed industry. So to ensure good, secure jobs for workers and to build wealth in communities that lasts, in communities that are already experiencing the sharp edge of the transition, we need an entirely new approach, one that plans ahead before private companies decide to abandon their workers. So, alongside a clear worker-led plan for the North Sea, unions and climate groups are calling for the government to commit to an emergency ring-fenced funding package in the spending review. So my final question to the Minister is this: will he meet with the Chancellor to ensure that those ring-fenced funds are secured, and will he ensure that past mistakes are not repeated in this North Sea transition?
Jim Shannon.
Chairman, first of all, a real pleasure to serve under your chairship as always, and can I thank the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North for raising this issue today. And whilst we may not always be aligned in all things, and I think of one in particular, the need for support for workers is something we can certainly share a view on. And what an introduction by the Honourable Lady as well, to set the scene so well with detail and information and with that incredible knowledge. It's also a great pleasure to see the Minister in his place. His commitment is never in doubt, and I think will be reassured by his answers. And also, it is a pleasure to see the Shadow Minister and himself today as well, and we look forward to his contribution. The North Sea oil and gas industry in the UK employs some estimated 150,000 to 200,000 workers, with a significant portion concentrated along the east and the north east coast. But why I want to make a contribution, and I want to remind everyone in this House that while that may be where the thrust of the industry seeks their workers from, I have a number of constituents who work in the North Sea oil fields, and they have done for 20, 30, 40 years, or probably all their workforce time. Indeed, I was coming home on the plane there, I think it was 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago it was, and the guy that was alongside me, he had been in Dubai in the past, where the Honourable Lady referred to. He'd also did work in the Middle East, and then was coming on that occasion from Libya, coming back to Belfast in Northern Ireland. So the industry and the sector employs work and people from all across Northern Ireland. My constituency, I know about them, but others from elsewhere as well. And whilst these new projects on icing grounds have been approved, they are unlikely to reverse the declining production and workforce size, as most of the remaining reserves are from existing developments. The industry also supports a larger indirect force through a supply chain, and quite clearly the impact will be across this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. These figures ensure the government must be seriously, and I believe they are, seriously considering the energy crisis and implications. And I know that this is on the Minister's agenda, as the government's own data on the situation is very telling, most helpful and encouraging, and I know the Minister will sum that up shortly. Figures from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero's digest of the UK energy statistics show a 72% reduction in UK oil and gas production occurring between 1999 and 2023. The North Sea Transition Authority also predicts an 89% drop in UK oil and gas production by some 2050. These stats can't be ignored. They do show a trend. And the fact is that the Office of National Statistics Analysis shows that direct jobs in oil and gas extraction fell by around a third between 2014 and 2023. Meanwhile, findings from the Robert Gordon University studying powering up the workforce in 2023 estimated that offshore renewables workforce, which includes offshore wind, carbon capture and storage and hydrogen, could increase and indeed some 70,000 to 138,000 in 2030. So these figures can't be ignored of the potential that are there, and the Honourable Lady very clearly said that the process of where they are today, the transition into other jobs for the future. The study also found that over 90% of the UK's oil and gas workforce have medium to high skills transferability and are well positioned to work in the adjacent energy sector. That can't be ignored. It's where we think we are, and it has been the focus of everybody in this debate so far. The issue that the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North raises is clear. Government is aware of the impending opportunity. So if government doesn't take action, the impending employment problem, and this must be addressed very, very urgently. Oil and gas companies must have support for diversification training and help for staff to ensure we do not have communities of, for instance, of coal miners, families being abandoned when we knew of the difficulties and the generations that this takes to combat. We have an opportunity today. Government has an opportunity today to act and see that transition, that transferable skills that we've all been referring to. I believe that the North Sea has more to yield that many have said today, and our opinions can differ on maybe on that. But we must, I believe, be united in looking to the care of the sector in the near and medium future, and government must take that lead today. I believe it's important that we look upon the bigger figure. I refer to those from the Northern Ireland and my constituent who have worked in the sector for some 30, 40 years, and their sons and others will look for opportunities. I want to make sure when government brings forward their thoughts for what's taking place, that the opportunities for jobs, for training, can apply to us all. And I always say the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland has many talents and much to do together. Let's continue to do just that. Thank you.
Pippa Halings for the Liberal Democrat front bench.
Thank you. It's an honour to serve under your chairship, Sir Desmond, and I thank the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North for bringing forward this critically important debate, and also for her compelling speech, which really laid out the situation in her constituency in terms of the number of job losses, increasing poverty, and as equally with my honourable friend as well, who's talking about the loss of skilled workers and jobs to overseas countries. Sir Desmond, managing the transition from a North Sea which is dominated by oil and gas to a North Sea which has a future for commercially viable renewable energy is absolutely critical to reaching the UK's climate targets by 2030. And a North Sea, a new bright future, if we get it right, will enable us to strengthen our energy security, reduce skyrocketing energy prices for our households and businesses, secure the UK's global leadership in floating offshore wind, and importantly, rebuild our manufacturing and port capacity whilst delivering transitional skills, pathways and jobs for both those highly skilled workers but also the thousands that are employed in the supply chains currently for our oil and gas. We Liberal Democrats are opposed to the new oil fields at Jackdaw and Rosebank, and we want to see the government commit to the winding down of the oil and gas industry, as was agreed at COP28 among all countries. The reality is that new drilling won't provide jobs or protect workers in a declining basin, because... I will give way.
It's estimated that Jackdaw could provide 5% of the UK's gas needs. Would the Honourable Member and the Liberal Democrats indeed prefer that we imported that LNG from elsewhere instead?
I thank the Honourable Member for her intervention, and as I have consistently said and said during the debate around those new oil fields at Jackdaw and Rosebank, none of them have provided the jobs that were predicted. They've all been offshored to Dubai. But in terms of the gas dependency that you've talked about, it is absolutely critical to take Putin's boot off our necks is to make sure that we've got homegrown energy. And that's the way that we can do this. Because after 50 years of intensive extraction, the North Sea is now an ageing and expensive basin. And the transition away from oil and gas production is already underway, with reserves in terminal and irreversible decline. Jobs in the UK's oil and gas industry have more than halved in the past decade. 227,000 direct roles have disappeared, despite the issuance of 400 new drilling licences and record profits for the major oil companies. Moreover, losses in the supply chains far outnumber those directly employed in the industry. This is not fair or just. And we must act now to ensure that the transition ahead supports the workers and communities, as was so eloquently said by my honourable friend here, who have powered Britain for generations, ensure they're not left behind. And the future of the North Sea can be bright, with us boasting some of Europe's best sites for renewable energy. Our current installed capacity of 50 wind farms already accounts for around a quarter of global offshore wind capacity, and our offshore wind potential surpasses our projected energy demand, making this key to our energy security. But the Liberal Democrats have always been clear: the only way to create long-term secure jobs is to invest in supporting workers to transition into clean energy industries. The unjust transition, as we have heard, of the oil refinery at Grangemouth is a clear illustration and warning of what happens without early government intervention and investment, showing that these decisions cannot be left to industry alone. So what jobs are we talking about? We're talking about new jobs within the new manufacturing and our own domestic green energy supply chain. Because the UK has consistently failed to seize the full economic benefits of our leadership in offshore wind. As we've heard today, currently the vast majority of Britain's offshore wind capacity is owned by foreign companies, and the typical North Sea turbine still contains 3 times more imported material than UK-made content. So we need to make sure we've got the manufacturing here of our turbines. We also need to ensure that our port capacity, and that's in terms of being able to have both the manufacturing but also to deal with both our fixed and floating offshore capacity is enabled. Otherwise, that will also be given to other countries. This could create an estimated 23,000 good green jobs, both directly and through supply chains. I will do.
And I appreciate all the remarks that she's been making. Would she agree that one of the ways in which Britain could help to ensure that that transition is not just, but that is orderly and managed, is by doing what countries like Denmark have done and joining the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance?
Yes, we very much support the fact that we should be joining the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance. Following on from COP28, and we look forward to COP30, and hopefully UK can once again demonstrate that global leadership together with other countries in an alliance of finally having a clear transition pathway towards that. Our UK port capacity currently is one of the key bottlenecks slowing our renewable rollout. UK ports and dockside facilities urgently require upgrades so they can handle industrial-scale floating offshore wind, including access, channel size, landside availability and crane capacity. So the government's proposed National Wealth Fund is welcome, but we absolutely need to see that that is secured and even expanded. But it's the workers that we need to make sure are part of that new manufacturing industry and those supply chains. And research has shown that over 90% of the UK's oil and gas workforce have transferable skills but face support and clean pathway. As Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Climate Change, I was pleased to meet with an oil and gas worker from Aberdeen last month, Chair, as part of a round table to discuss the challenges and opportunities facing workers. She described how Aberdeen has an abundance of STEM skills ready to drive forward the transition to clean energy. But she shared that many of the skills workers are having to pay out of their own pockets to gain new qualifications, often duplicating qualifications workers already have. It's clear that more concrete support is needed to support workers in finding and moving into alternative employment, from improving the energy skills passport to addressing training barriers, and more broadly delivering a new deal for the North Sea, which has workers' needs at its core. And I would like to ask the Minister to commit and show us how the government plan to ensure there are clear, accessible pathways in place to support workers to move between industries. Because, Chair, in conclusion, Putin's barbaric and illegal invasion of Ukraine exposes the risks of relying upon countries that may seek to exploit our dependence on fossil fuels and use it to their advantage. Chair, oil and gas workers built the foundations of Britain's energy system, and as we chart a new path forward, it's our moral and economic duty to ensure they're not abandoned, but empowered, respected and placed at the very centre of that journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Desmond. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning in this debate, and I'd like to congratulate and thank the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North for bringing such an important debate to Westminster Hall today, and indeed for opening the debate with such an eloquent and passionate speech on behalf of her constituents. For her, and I know so many of us who are attending here today, this is a deeply personal debate. We all know and or are related, or both, to people who are employed at the minute in the oil and gas industry, located off the north-east coast of our country. And so finding a solution to this and to ensuring that this transition is indeed just for those workers is vitally important for our constituents. We often talk about the needing the North Sea for our energy security, to produce the tax revenue for the exchequer, to support supply chains and indeed local economies. It sounds incredibly intangible at times, but for the 200,000 people employed in the oil and gas industry, directly or indirectly, the impacts of the transition in the North Sea will be very tangible indeed. And as the decline accelerates, we risk seeing lost incomes and lost futures and whole communities without a purpose. That's 200,000 employees up and down the entire United Kingdom, because the oil and gas supply chain touches nearly every single constituency in the United Kingdom. But more than 68% of all direct employment is in Scotland, and more than 80% of that is in the north-east of Scotland, in and around Aberdeen. My own constituency of West Aberdeenshire and Kincardine, everybody knows someone who relies on the offshore industry for the livelihood. And just last week, during recess, I was in West Hill speaking to companies, and indeed that town, which is the subsea exploration capital of the world, home to Total, Technip, Tetra, Subsea 7 and more. The oil and gas industry is the lifeblood of the north-east of Scotland. That is evident to anybody that is visiting. But whilst congratulating and indeed paying tribute to the way in which the Honourable Member for Aberdeen North brought this debate today, and the obvious passion that she brings to this and the concern that she has for constituents, I can't help reflecting on some of the rhetoric emanating from the Scottish Government over the past few years and its presumption against oil and gas, which has contributed to an increasingly pessimistic outlook for the North Sea. And indeed, when you engage with oil and gas companies, it is indeed the language and the tone that we use to describe the situation in the North Sea that they say is driving away the investment that they need to drive forward the investment in new technologies such as offshore wind, floating or fixed bottom. When we talk about decline or ageing or terminal, this to inward investors from overseas is not a picture of a thriving and attractive investment picture. And so we need to, I think, address that language. And as yes, of course, always.
Do investors not know that it's a declining field?
Well, of course, the honourable member is right, or the right honourable member is correct. It is a declining base, and everybody is aware of that. But the language that we use around that, and we don't point out the positives that can be achieved through further investment. We don't recognise that it's the profits being generated by those energy companies who are engaged primarily in the extraction and exploitation of oil and gas underneath the North Sea that are going to be investing in those new technologies. We need to convince shareholders who are deciding whether or not to invest in the Middle East or Southeast Asia or the United States of America or elsewhere in the globe, whether or not the North Sea is still an attractive place to invest, that the language that we use around that basin and indeed that industry here in the United Kingdom is really incredibly important. And I would urge the right honourable member to engage with the industry and speak to individuals, as I have, as I know that the Minister does, and I know that the member for Aberdeen North and others do, because this is exactly what they're telling us. They want to contribute to the transition. They will be leading the transition. Indeed, they do lead the transition, but they need the negative atmosphere that is overshadowing the North Sea right now to change, and that means changing some of the rhetoric and language that we use to describe the industry that is so important to the economy of the North East of Scotland. Always.
I appreciate the point he's making about the choice of language, but can I ask him to confirm perhaps his own position and that of his party? Do you still believe in net zero and the drive towards achieving our climate targets?
Yes, of course we believe in net zero, but what we don't believe is setting arbitrary targets and dates which are unachievable without making this country poorer or more reliant on foreign imports for our energy supply. The fact is that we're seeing a doubling of imports of LNG in this country just to keep the lights on as we accelerate the decline, actively accelerate the decline in our own North Sea oil and gas industry. That is nonsensical. It's madness. It's an act of national self-harm. And so what we should be doing is reverting to what our policy was a policy of maximum economic recovery from the North Sea, whilst doing all we can to ensure that those companies that are involved in that do invest in new technologies. I'm conscious of time, but of course I'd be delighted to give way.
I just can't resist, and I thank the honourable member for giving way because I time limits, but it just, when we're talking about language and how important that is, isn't it considered to be an act of national self-harm to talk down what our incredible opportunity is for the future of North Sea in terms of being a global leader?
Well, I'm not. I thank the honourable lady for her contribution to that question. I'm not in any way trying to talk down the North Sea. What we need to do is talk up those companies. It's the very companies, especially in the supply chain, that it's the technologies and the skilled workforce which at present are relying on a successful and profitable oil and gas industry that we will need to develop the new technologies in the North Sea. It is the ships that are engaged in drilling, for example, for rigs that will be used to work on the new offshore wind farms. And right now, as work is drying up in the North Sea as a result of the accelerated decline we are seeing, those assets are being sent to other parts of the world, being redeployed or redesigned. And so when we call on them to help speed up the deployment of new offshore wind farms, they will not be there. The skilled workforce that we will need to develop these new wind farms and other technologies, they will be overseas because they will be offered high-paying jobs in existing energy sectors in the UAE, in Qatar, in Australia, in North America, in Southeast Asia. And we can't just flick a switch and expect all of these workers in that supply chain to be there, which is why we need to see a continually a profitable and successful energy industry, and that is, like it or lump it, at the minute reliant on continued investment in our oil and gas industry, and it's good for energy security as well, and good for the Treasury. So it makes abundant sense in my mind that we continue to support it. the high-paid jobs in renewables that are going to exist simply don't exist yet. I mean, that is a fact. They do not exist. We were promised by 2020 there would be 130,000 green manufacturing jobs, and we are frankly seeing a fraction of those jobs materialising at present. The member for South Cambridgeshire talks about the capacity that we need to improve or expand in our ports. Well, if you look at South Aberdeen port, Aberdeen South Harbour, in the port of Aberdeen, which was built specifically to take advantage of the investment that they assumed and banked on coming from the expansion in the deployment of offshore wind. Still to this day, only 1% of their overall profit is driven by offshore wind and renewables. 60% they are reliant continually on the oil and gas industry. And until that shifts, until the balance shifts, we need to ensure that these companies that are driving that investment continue to invest in the North Sea, and they will not if the policies that are being driven by this government, I'm afraid, are continued. We need to see a transition that is just. The member for Alloa and Grangemouth, as ever, spoke eloquently about his own constituency. And if you speak to workers in Grangemouth, and indeed those workers that are looking with great trepidation at what the future holds, there is nothing just about this transition as it stands right now. It's incumbent on government to do what they can to ensure the safety and security of jobs, ensure the continued profitability and investability of our oil and gas industry as it seeks to transition into the technologies of the future, and ensure the economic success and sustainability of the North East of Scotland and indeed the Scottish economy as a whole.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Sir Desmond, and it's a pleasure to be in this debate under your chairship. And can I join others in congratulating the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North, not just for bringing this important debate, but for the tone in which she introduced the debate, the seriousness and the passion, I think, coming through in her contribution. And I genuinely thank her for that and for all the conversations that we have on this very important topic. It's been a wide-ranging debate, but I think what's quite interesting is at the heart of all of the contributions has been, I think, three key things that I'll try and sum up in my closing. First of all, that we may all disagree with timing and with pace and with detail of the transition, but there is an acknowledgement and an understanding that a transition in the North Sea is underway, and that is important to say and to recognise. And so secondly, if we do accept that, and it seems like we all do, we then need a credible and detailed plan on how we manage that. And I thought the Honourable Lady put it very well by saying that we need the transition managed properly, and I'll come back to that point. And the third point, clearly, is that in any plan and in any transition, the workforce must be at the absolute heart of what we do. And I thought the Shadow Secretary of State made the point very well that this is deeply personal, of course, for anyone with a job in the oil and gas sector, but particularly in the North East of Scotland, where there is such a significant concentration of workers in this industry. Many members have spoken about the importance of oil and gas in our energy story. A few months ago, I was pleased to be at BP's headquarters to celebrate with them the 60th anniversary of the first licence being issued in the North Sea, and they had a really quite powerful video, actually, of the history of some of their offshore infrastructure and just the engineering skill that it has taken to extract oil and gas from extremely difficult North Sea waters over the past 60 years is extraordinary, and we should be very proud, and I've said this on a number of occasions, we should be very proud of that workforce and for everything they have achieved. And oil and gas will continue to play a critical role in our energy mix and our economy for decades to come. But as we embrace and as the world embraces the clean energy transition, what I want us to tackle is not just to say that we should be very proud of the history of the North Sea, but that we should be hugely ambitious and excited about the opportunities that come in the next chapter of that energy story as well. And so while we talk about our clean power mission is about driving forward clean power in this country, but also creating the jobs in manufacturing and industry that goes along with it, it is critical in communities like this that those jobs materialise. And it's right, of course, that we recognise the tens of thousands of jobs that have been lost in this sector over the past 10 years. And the truth is that we should have been planning for this transition a long time ago. And my honourable friend for Grangemouth and Alloa makes the point about Grangemouth. There is no greater example in our present time of the failure to plan for that transition when we knew years ago that, in fact, Grangemouth was in a precarious position. We should have been planning at that point for the workforce And my kind of driving purpose in this role is to make sure that we don't make the same mistake again in the wider North Sea sector. And so, on the points that I've raised, I think the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North made the point around whether the government is listening. And I do want to just, for a second, make the point around how much we have engaged with the sector, how much I've spent in Aberdeen listening to all of the industry. And I think it is important, not just the oil and gas companies themselves, but right through the supply chains, in decommissioning, in training. I had a really interesting visit to a training provider meeting apprentices who are working in oil and gas in the immediate term but are going to be transitioning into renewables and are already being trained on both oil and gas platforms and the renewables jobs that comes next. So there is some really exciting work going on. What we need to do is capitalise that and speed up those projects across the city and across the North East. We've got a fantastic opportunity to utilise the skills, as many members have raised, that are already in Aberdeen and in what is a global race for these skilled workers and for much of the equipment and the supply chains in the clean power missions that much of the world is on. We have a real opportunity to capitalise on that in Aberdeen. And Robert Gordon University, whose ears will be burning after this debate, I suspect, with the number of times they have been raised. But I had a fantastic visit to Robert Gordon University a few months back to go through some of the data in great detail, I have to say, and it was fascinating. But the members have raised the point about the number of jobs that are transferable across from oil and gas into renewables. That presents us with an enormous opportunity to provide long-term sustainable jobs for these people. But the pace at which we do it and the methods that we use to support that workforce to transition are key. And that's why when we came into government, we were determined to work with the Scottish Government and with industry to move forward on skills passporting. We've launched the first phase of that. There is more work to do, clearly, in terms of how we expand the passporting process. But it is a sign that we are taking practical action to support this workforce to transition. The question about a plan for the transition was raised by the Honourable Lady for Aberdeen North, and it's a very good point to make. We've launched our consultation on the future of energy in the North Sea. We were very keen that that was a genuinely open conversation with industry, with communities, with trade unions about what the future of energy in the North Sea should look like, not one just narrowly focused on a series of specific questions. It's still open, in fact, so there is a week left if you haven't had a chance to submit your consultation responses, or for the many thousands, I'm sure, watching this Westminster Hall debate online, please do submit responses to the consultation. But it is a really key opportunity. We've deliberately asked open, broad questions to have a real, genuine conversation about what the future of energy in the North Sea looks like. Partly, the first section of that consultation deals with the data and the science about the decline of the North Sea basin. And the Shadow Secretary of State rightly makes the point about language here, and I have always been careful about the language I use, but it is also important to recognise the declining nature of the basin means that we do have to start now planning for what comes next. And I've had a number of roundtables as part of that engagement, including a few weeks ago with trade unions, to look at specific support that's necessary for the workforce now. Of course, I'll give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. On that point, the trade unions and others, indeed, have made a case for the £335 million a year to be invested in that skills and training to ensure that workers are not having to not be paid on the days that they're taking their training, amongst other things. What conversations can he have with colleagues to ensure that that happens?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the point and for his contribution in the debate. And he's right, it's an important point around not just the passporting and the training that's available, but the ability of workers to access it. It's a point I will take away, and it did come up in the roundtable with trade unions. We've also, of course, launched a number of skills pilots, of which Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire is one of the 4 skills pilots. It's a slightly different process than the other 3 because skills is in fact devolved to the Scottish Government, so the UK Government's role is slightly different, but we want to work in partnership to ensure we'll deliver it. But I'll take the specific point away and come back to it. Of course.
Thank you, Mr. For giving way. And indeed, pay tribute to his continued commitment and engagement with the industry and indeed the region. He may be buying a second home in my constituency, the amount of times that he seems to be in and out of the north east of Scotland these days. And of course, we welcome that because any engagement with government is, of course, very positive. And indeed, for the tone in which the consultation was launched into the future of the North Sea, it is incredibly positive and has been warmly welcomed. There is a second consultation ongoing, however, right now by Treasury into the post-EPL fiscal framework. Can I ask him what engagement his department is having with Treasury on what that looks like, and if there is any opportunity to speed up the process by which we can replace the energy profits levy from where it sits right now?
Yeah, I thank him for the point. And it was very deliberate that we launched both the consultation on the future of energy and the Treasury consultation on the future of the EPL at the same time, because this is about bringing them together to give certainty about what the future of industry is. My colleague, the Exchequer Secretary, I think is his title, has been in Aberdeen a number of times, and indeed we've had many of the same engagements around dealing with the Fiscal Forum and others to have that conversation. I engage with the Treasury colleagues regularly on this question. What we're very keen to do is that the EPL, which has changed many times under both governments, hasn't given that confidence to industry that they are calling for. So post-2030, we've been clear it will end, and we want to put in place a regime that gives confidence about what that landscape looks like, but still has built into it the recognition of excess profits. And so the consultation is open, I think, for another 2 or 3 weeks. And again, I'll very briefly, but then I'll need to make some progress.
On from this point, because the taxation regime is absolutely critical to the ability of those companies to make profits in the North Sea. Were it not for the fact that we have the lowest rate, the lowest base rate of tax on oil and gas production companies in the world, it's only because we have the windfall tax that we take it up to the average. So he really does need to look at the investment available if we were not subsidising the operations from the public purse. And it's not quite a zero-sum game as he suggests.
Well, as always, I thank him for that contribution, but he tempts me into both concluding a consultation and speaking on behalf of the Treasury, two things that I absolutely will not do. But he's made an important point. And look, the purpose of the consultation, again, an open consultation with all those in the sector, is to genuinely get to the heart of some of these questions. So it's a good point. I wanted... very briefly, yes.
Very briefly, will he agree to consider the timescale of the outcomes of the consultation in order that people have got as early notice as possible in advance of next year's budgets, if possible?
Yeah, I was going to come to that point. It's a very well-made point. On both consultations, we are looking internally at the moment around how quickly we can turn around the responses. Clearly, there's a balance to be struck with, particularly on the future of the North Sea consultation. It is a hefty document. We expect a significant number of responses, which is a good thing. There is a balance to be struck between very quickly turning around a response and having a really credible, detailed look at all the evidence that has been submitted. But we are trying to move as quickly as possible with both of those. I do want to turn just briefly to the future point and the points that have been raised by a number of honourable members around investment in clean energy. It is right to say that the future of the North Sea has an enormous potential around offshore and floating offshore wind, and in a number of other industries as well, in hydrogen and in carbon capture. And we, as a government, have moved as fast as we possibly can since coming into government to drive this forward. The establishment, as the honourable gentleman made the point of Great British Energy in Aberdeen, although I can't help but notice the SNP didn't support that. But that is all about driving forward investment, not just jobs in Great British Energy's headquarters, but through the investments that it makes in supply chains and in developments right across the country, but particularly in the north east of Scotland as well. We oversaw a record-breaking renewables auction, and as many honourable members have raised, we are also working through at the moment the process of the Clean Industry Bonus, designed to reward investment in good manufacturing jobs and clean supply chains. This gets to the heart of the point that many members have raised, about how we bring the benefits of the Clean Power Mission here to the UK, delivering the industrial jobs that too often have been missing in our transition. And of course, the Clean Power Action Plan will drive £40 billion a year of private investment towards our goal by clean power by 2030. Conscious of time, I want to just sort of reflect on two very brief points that the Honourable Lady made in her closing remarks. First of all, around listening to communities, which is a point I think is very important. I will continue to do that, as will my colleagues. But secondly, around the oversight and management of the plan, this is a question we are looking at. I'm always slightly resistant to simply saying that setting up a task force or a commission is the answer to things. But I think the point that the Just Transition Commission made and that the Honourable Lady makes is right, that we do need to grasp this at the heart of government, and that is something we are actively looking at. And so I conclude, Sir Desmond, by thanking again the Honourable Lady for a really important contribution. The future of the North Sea is incredibly important for all our communities, particularly in the North East, but for our energy and economy in a wider sense. We are determined to deliver a credible, just and prosperous plan for that future, for the workforce now and for the workforce to come in generations to come. Thank you very much.
Kirsty Blackman.
Desmond, thank you to all members, and especially the Minister, for your considered comments during the course of this debate. I think this is bigger than politics. I think it's more important than kicking around a political football here. I'm glad that so many people focused on the jobs that there are. We want to ensure that we can take advantage of this opportunity and not just try and avert total disaster, because there is a real prize to be won here. And I'd just like to finish on a quote from Paul Deleu, who we've all mentioned, from Robert Gordon University, who has said, "The urgency has shifted dramatically. Therefore, Minister, the time is now to take action in order to protect those jobs."
The question is that this House has considered transitional support for North Sea oil and gas workers. As many are as of that opinion, say aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order.